For the last few weeks, we've been focusing our attention on what I call, the lead up to the story of the birth of Jesus. And that lead up has involved a couple of announcements of remarkable sons that were going to be born to a pair of very unlikely mothers. The first one, of course, is a senior citizen named Elizabeth. And the other one is a virgin named Mary. Now, the announcements were made via Angel Express, and they represent a major leap forward in the story of the nation of Israel. Because these boys that are going to be born were, first of all, the very first prophet sent by God in over 400 years. That's the first kid. And then a little bit later, a second kid was going to be born, and he tops the first one. He's the son of David, the king who had been promised to the people of Israel centuries before. And his mission, when he comes, would be to rescue Israel from her enemies and then restore Israel's relationship to God. So it's, kind of a big deal. And Luke wants us to really zone in on these two babies and the announcements of their birth that we have here in this passage. And so what we've done the last 2 weeks is talk about the contrasting ways that the recipients of those announcements responded to the message, right? The first message, the first announcement about the baby prophet who was going to come to prepare the way for the Messiah came to a man named Zechariah. And Zechariah was so overwhelmed by the news that he responded in cynicism and in doubt. He questioned God and even asked him for a sign before he would even believe it. Now, God wasn't crazy about that, and God gave him a sign, all right, but the sign turned out to be the form of a supernatural silence. He was struck dumb until the day that the baby would be born. Now, Mary, on the other hand, responded very differently. She was incredibly confused about what God said was going to happen. But even with her confusion, she chose to submit herself to God's plan, and she accepted the news of the arrival of her baby as her destiny. And she trusted that God would take care of her and sort everything out. Now that we've talked about those things, you would think that we would be ready to just dive into the stories of these babies being born, wouldn't you? I mean, we've got this whole lead up, the whole setup. We know their parents a little bit about them. But here's the funny thing about Luke. Luke decides he wants to linger here, pre-birth, for a little bit. And so that means he wants his readers to linger here as well. Right around verse 24 of Luke chapter 1, Luke's attention shifts to a character in the story that, frankly, we in this room haven't talked much about yet. And that's not Zechariah, we've talked about him, but Zechariah's wife, Elizabeth. Elizabeth takes a prominent role in both her own story with Zechariah and also Mary's story. And Elizabeth has some really important things to teach us as well. So this morning, what I want to do is turn to Elizabeth and ask Elizabeth, what can we learn from you? So first what I want to do is I want to take a look at Elizabeth's situation before the announcement of her son's soon arrival, okay? Jump to that later. Luke chapter 1, verse 5. We're going to start this. This is a reminder. We've read this before. Luke 1:5, in the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was, here we go, Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. But they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and both of them, we find out, were advanced in years. Now, immediately in this text, we learn two things about Elizabeth. Number one, we learn that she's a righteous person in a good relationship with God. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But the second thing, and the one that really jumps out at you from the page, is that she is barren. Which means that not only does she not have any children, for some reason that's never identified or explained, she not only doesn't have children, she's unable to conceive any children. Now, of course, we understand today, with a little bit of advances in medical technology, that the problem could have been Zechariah's fault. We know that. But only one member of the couple is hung with the label of barren, right? And that's Elizabeth. Now, if you've read the Old Testament, which I highly recommend, by the way, you've probably noticed that women who are unable to have children have a certain stigma attached to them. In fact, there was a common belief that barrenness in a woman was a sign of God's judgment on that woman. And this is pretty clear, by the way, in the story of the most famous patriarch, except for Abraham, I guess the second most famous patriarch of the Jewish people, who was a guy by the name of Jacob. Now, Jacob had some problems in his life, and one of the biggest ones is he had 2 wives. And these 2 wives happened to be sisters, which is like triple problems, right? Leah and Rachel are their names. So I want to just remind you of the story. Look on the screen behind me. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, and now what does that mean? Leah was hated by her husband. He never intended to marry her in the first place. It's a long story. It's very Lifetime movie. It's disturbing, okay? But Leah was hated. Jacob didn't really care much for her, but she sort of got attached to him, but he got tricked into marrying her. So when God saw that she was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel, she's the favorite wife, the one Jacob wanted to marry from jump, she was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction. Remember that phrase a little bit later. He has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me. Is that not a sad statement? Can you kind of jump into her shoes for a second and feel what she's feeling? Continues on. She conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. And when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister, and she said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. And notice Jacob's response. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? So Jacob is associating God's blessing with fertility. To be barren was not just an embarrassment to you or a disappointment to you, but it was also a possible hint that maybe God is punishing you for something that you had done wrong. Because then later on in the story, when Rachel is able to have a baby, notice how she responds here in Genesis 30, verse 22. It says, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her, and he opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my what? Reproach. Rachel felt herself to be the bearer of reproach. Reproach from God and likely from the people around her. Now, reproach is not a word we use very often in 2025. So let me get into it. What is reproach? Reproach goes beyond embarrassment to a deep sense of shame and guilt. It's the sense that I have failed and everybody knows that I have failed too. Oh, and by the way, it's also my fault and God is against me and the people around me look down on me. That's reproach. It's shame on steroids, okay? And it carries with it a heavy burden that can lead to incredible depression and all kinds of down things. David, at one point in his life, felt reproach for other things not related to barrenness. That was one problem David didn't have. But he felt reproach for many other reasons, and this is his testimony of what it feels like to have reproach on his shoulders. Look at this, in Psalm 69, it says this, you know my reproach, David says, my shame and my dishonor, my foes are all known to you. Reproaches have broken my heart so that I am in despair. I looked for pity, but there was how much? None. I looked for comforters, but I found none. David's reproach broke his heart, leading him to feel abandoned and to feel despair. Rachel probably felt that way too, right? She yells at her husband, "Give me children or I will die." Her barrenness and the reproach that she carried was almost too much for her. So let's take that back to Elizabeth. Does she feel the same way about her barrenness? Is it possible that I'm just projecting a little bit onto her? Well, take a look at Luke chapter 1. We're back in Luke 1. Look at verse 24 and 25. Because this is when the story starts to turn in her favor, but she reveals to us how she had been feeling before this thing happened. Look at verse 24. After those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, and for 5 months she kept herself hidden, saying, "Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me." Do you remember when Leah said that? He looked on me to take away my reproach among people, which is almost exactly what Rachel said when she was able to conceive. I think what Luke is trying to do is say, yes, Elizabeth felt the same pressure that these women in the Old Testament felt. She felt that same shame and sense of failure. She felt reproach. She felt reproach. Elizabeth felt the eyes of judgment upon her. People who were assuming she was childless because of some secret sin she had committed. And I think it caused her a great deal of grief, just like it did for Rachel, just like David's reproach did for him, and probably many other women before her. She probably feels completely alone, just like David felt, with no one to comfort her. Which makes this first piece of information in verse 6 to be much more remarkable to me. Go back to verse 6 again, would you? Verse 6 of Luke 1 says, "And they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord." Friends, our friend Elizabeth here is carrying a heavy load of reproach and shame and all of that. And yet, in spite of that, we learn about Elizabeth that she remained faithful to God. She didn't allow her difficult situation and just the sheer unfairness of it all to turn her away from God. She continued to live according to God's expectations. Don't you think she could have justified in her own mind just throwing up her hands and saying, "Well, why should I do what you want me to do, God, when you won't do what I want you to do for me? If you're not going to take care of me, why should I do what you ask me to do?" She could have justified that and said, if God's just going to bail on me, I'll bail on him. But we know she didn't do that. Instead, you know what she devoted herself to? Studying the law and training herself to live by the law. And apparently she's not doing it as a way to twist God's arm to give her what she wanted, because she's already barren. She doesn't think there's any hope of that changing. She's simply doing the right thing because it's the right thing. It made me think as I was reading this, has my faithfulness to God ever been tested like that? How about you? Has yours? Maybe, you really want something from God. And I don't think any of us are exempt from having a desire in our hearts that God give us a thing from time to time. And sometimes they're small things, but a lot of times those things are huge and they're really important. So what do we tend to do? We want something from God, so we sort of make this unspoken deal with God. Okay, God, I'll tell you what. You give me this thing, and I'll live for you, and I'll serve you, and all that good stuff. But here's the question. What if you try to make that deal, and God says, no, I'm not going to give you the thing? I'm just not going to. Would you still be able to love him? Would you still be able to serve him? Would you still make it your goal, like Elizabeth did, of obeying him? I mean, that's tough, isn't it? It's hard to do it when you don't think you're going to get rewarded for your faithfulness. But Elizabeth did. That's the kind of woman that she was. But there's one more remarkable detail that I want to point out to you about Elizabeth's situation, and it's actually buried in the little part of the story where the angel Gabriel is talking to Zechariah. Can I show it to you? It's in verse 11. Luke chapter 1, verse 11. The angel is talking to Zechariah. There appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your" what? "Prayer has been heard. And your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John." Did you catch that little detail? I've skipped over it 100 times, but it's really, really important. Gabriel, the angel, claims that he has come with good news of a son that is at least in part a response to prayers that Zechariah has made. Apparently, this tells me Zechariah, and I assume Elizabeth right along with him, have kept praying about their situation. Even after years and decades piled on top of each other of no, 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 and then silence, they never gave up 100% on the crazy possibility that God might just hear them and give them the child they hungered for. I mean, do you know how hard that is? To hold on to hope that long in the face of what looks like abandonment from God? Friends, so much of our relationship with God boils down to what I call bargaining and negotiating with God. We have wants and we have needs, and rightly so. What do we do with those wants and needs? We take them to God as our Father and our provider, and we ask for Him, "God, intervene." And you know what? Sometimes He does so immediately, and sometimes it's dramatic. But many times, and maybe I put this in parentheses here so I didn't know if I had the courage to say it, most times, God doesn't intervene immediately and dramatically. Sometimes He waits to give us an answer for a long time. And friends, how we handle that time while we're waiting, and that hurt that we gain from waiting, and that disappointment that comes with waiting, how we handle that time matters. How many times have I allowed God's silence to wound me, to convince me that God doesn't really care about me, and to pull away from God out of a sense of pain and betrayal? Friends, how easy is it to stop praying? Super easy. It's really hard to keep coming back to God, to keep making ourselves vulnerable to Him, to keep expressing our desires, to keep hope alive. It's not easy. It's better, it's easier to just shut down and try to just make life work, put your head down and get busy. But it doesn't seem that Elizabeth allowed that to happen in her heart. She stayed faithful even through her reproach, and she kept praying. And in time, at a time when even Zechariah has given in to doubt and cynicism, God breaks His long silence. And what does He do? He sends them the answer to their prayer in the form of a miraculous conception. Look at verse 24 one more time. After these days, his wife Elizabeth conceived. What an amazing thing. And what does Elizabeth do with this knowledge that she has conceived a baby finally after all these years? She does something that maybe seems a little strange. Verse 24. For 5 months, she kept herself hidden. And you know what? I thought about that. I'm like, why? Why hide it? Like, you're finally pregnant. You finally have had this moment. Why not make it public? Why not talk to everybody about it? And you know what I think she's doing? I think it takes her 5 full months to process the fact that this has actually happened. She and her husband he can't talk either, right? She can't even talk to him. I mean, she could talk to him. Maybe she's having more fun talking to him than ever before. But, she's just keeping it all in. Introverts, you're not alone, okay? Be encouraged. And then when Elizabeth speaks for the first time, at least the recorded time, her words reveal to us that Elizabeth not only has a difficult situation she's dealing with, but now she's learned some lessons about God when God showed up. And these are lessons we need to learn too, and I want to hit these really quick before we move on. Look at verse 25. This is what Elizabeth said. Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me to take away my reproach among people. Friends, you know what Elizabeth learned about God? She learned that God sees her. He sees her. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know if she was convinced of that all along through the story. Maybe she had her moments of doubt and cynicism as well. But once the miracle finally happened and God broke the silence, you know what she realized? The Lord looked on me. It's exactly what Leah had said about God looking and seeing her affliction, being unloved. And Elizabeth says, the Lord looked on me. He saw me. Friends, isn't that what we worry in the deepest, most vulnerable parts of our hearts? Don't we worry that God doesn't really see us? Maybe it's because we're too small, right? Or we're too far away, or we're too evil, or we're too unimportant, or maybe God just doesn't care. He's got bigger things on his plate than worrying about me growing old with no child to take care of me in my old age. See, friends, I think our greatest fear is that we're going to be forgotten by God, that we're going to be overlooked by him. Hey, God, do you even see me? Do you see my loneliness? Do you see my pain? Do you see the sacrifices I'm making for you? Do I even matter to you? Long silences where God doesn't answer those questions directly can make us wonder. I'll bet that Elizabeth wondered along the way, but here she is, a baby finally growing happily in her womb. The wait has been long, but the wait is over. The prayer has been answered, and she realizes something. He saw me all along. I do matter to him. I'm not invisible. God sees me. He looked on me in the time of my distress. Look at verse 25 one more time. Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me. I love this. She also learned that God shows up. Thus has the Lord done for me. See, God didn't just send thoughts and prayers. Didn't just change the profile picture on their Facebook. I'm really thinking of you right now, Elizabeth. God showed up. He took action. He didn't just feel bad about her. He didn't just care about her. He decided to do something about what he saw. God followed through on what he said he would do. Now, admittedly, let's just say it out loud. It took a lot longer than they thought it was going to take. And it was certainly a lot longer than they had hoped. I'm sure they hoped to raise a child in their 20s and 30s, not their 70s and 80s. But the point is that he did come through. He did act. Elizabeth, at that moment, has proof in her body, in her womb, that God shows up, and he shows up at exactly the right time. While you're waiting, it's really hard to remember and to believe that if I just hang in there and hold on to hope, that God will act at the right moment. And friends, I understand it. That's what I call the gamble of faith, right? Because faith whispers in your ear, hang on. God's not going to leave you high and dry. God's going to come through. He's going to show up. So don't give up. That's what faith whispers in your ears, but you don't have proof while you're doing it. The proof is always to come. It's in the future. And it was for Elizabeth, and it was decades in the future. But Elizabeth listened to the voice of faith, and she waited long enough, she hung on long enough to be able to bear witness to all of us while we're waiting for our miracle. Hey guys, I got news for you. God shows up. He shows up. So wait for him. Be patient. Hold on. Verse 25 again. Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me, I love this, to take away my reproach among people. You know what she learned? She learned that God alone determines her value. Why did God give Elizabeth a baby? Partly it's to save Israel and prepare the way for the Messiah. That's the big picture plan. But you know what the small picture plan for why he gave a baby to Elizabeth was? Because God saw her woundedness in her reproach, and he said, I want to take that away. He wanted Elizabeth to know that she didn't need to be ashamed of being barren because it wasn't her fault. He wasn't punishing her. He was actually waiting for the perfect time to bless her with this baby, and he had always planned to bless her with this baby. And when baby John arrives a few months later, it's going to change a lot of minds in the neighborhood about Zechariah and Elizabeth. And instead of reproaching them, you know what's going to happen in a few verses? We're going to look at it in a couple of weeks. You know what happens? Oh, her family and neighbors come for a big party at the circumcision. And everybody's happy and everything's great. They're going to rejoice with them. Why? Because they're going to get together with Zechariah and Elizabeth to celebrate God's blessings. I'm pretty sure there was a time in that community when people would walk by their home and kind of look out of the sides of their eyes. They don't have a child. God must be judging them for something. Let's keep moving. And there was probably a time when Elizabeth's value in her community was diminished because she had no children. But God knew all along that she had value. It didn't matter. Her circumstances did not determine her value. The opinions of her family and neighbors did not affect her fundamental value. Her value was determined by God. God saw her character, God saw her faith, God saw her tenacity, and he was pleased. And now, finally, he's going to make it just as clear to everybody else what he already knew, that Elizabeth already had value. Friends, people don't get to decide if you have value or not. Can I just say that again? Nobody gets to decide if you have value or not. God's people are determined, their value is determined by the one who made them. Even the people who are closest to you, who you love the most, whose opinion definitely matters about your value, do not determine whether you have value. Only God can do that. And God saw Elizabeth's value, and so he's like, you know what? It's time. It's time to take away that shame and reproach that she's been carrying unfairly all these years. God came to her defense. And he reminded her, hey, Elizabeth, you've always had value to me. You're on my side. I'm on your side. So friends, when you're struggling to believe you have value, maybe you're hearing the reproaches of other people in your head and what they've said to you. I beg you, would you take a minute in the midst of that accusation that's in your head? Would you just push pause on that tape that's playing in your head and just turn to God and say, God, who do you say that I am? God, who am I to you? God, what value do I have to you? And then you know what? You don't have to sit there and wait for some mystical moment where God drops this boom in your head and whispers. You don't even have to do that. All you have to do is open up your copy of the scriptures and soak in the incredible truths that God has spoken about you already. You have value. It's all over this book. Read it and turn to God, and don't let other people determine that for you. One last lesson that she learns. As a result of the information that Zechariah shared with her about God's plan for them and their son, Elizabeth learned another thing. God is the one who gives my life meaning. Do you know what Elizabeth realized kind of late in the game? is that God had an important part for them to play in a giant story. It's not just the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth having a happy little 3.2 children in the car, in the garage, and the whole 9 yards. That is not enough. That's not the story that she has an important part in. She has an important part in the story of God rescuing Israel and ultimately the entire world. She had a part to play. For decades, she probably wondered if she had missed her chance to make a difference. She may see mothers and the way they influence their children and go, man, I guess I missed my chance to influence somebody the way these mothers have influenced their children. I wonder if God can make a difference with me. I guess I'm too old. I guess life has passed me by. I've got too much disappointments. I've got too much cynicism. I got too much whatever. But no. Elizabeth, even now, to the very last minute of her life, she now has a purpose. She has a little boy to get ready for a mission that will change the world, to prepare God's people for the Messiah. Friends, aren't we humans desperate for meaning? Aren't we desperate for it? Like every day we're like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Animals don't often think about that. They don't worry about that. They just do whatever instinctually they're led to do. Why? Because they don't think about the whys of what we do. We do though. Why do I go to this same job every day? And oh my goodness, another diaper again, another set of dishes, another this, another that. And get it, I understand the mundaneness of life. That's no fun. I don't like it at all. But here's the deal. What if there's a God who can inject all of those common, mundane, everyday things with purpose and meaning? That there's actually a goal to this. That when you engage in your life with God's focus in your heart, you're accomplishing something eternal. It really matters. What we do in life echoes in eternity. What if that's actually true? What if it's not just a story that we tell ourselves to feel better about the fact that my life doesn't mean much? What if God has a purpose for you? God had a purpose for Elizabeth and Zechariah. And yes, it took a long time for it to become clear, but she stayed faithful. She kept praying. And then at the right moment, God said, this is why. This is why you've been doing this all these years. This is why you've prepared yourself. It's because I've got a mission and it's going to matter. Friends, God has something for you to do. A lot of you are spending a lot of time inside of doctor's offices and you didn't plan it and you don't want it and it's no fun. You know what? There's a mission somewhere in that office. There is. There's a purpose and a meaning in fighting through the obstacles that are in front of you. There's a reason why you have to put those extra hours in. There's a reason why you have to suffer. It's not meaningless. And Elizabeth learned that lesson. Oh my word, all this time. I thought my chance had passed me by. And here it is, I'm at the end of my life, but God has something for me to do. Friends, he's got something for all of us to do. I got way off my notes there. Well, how does Elizabeth respond to this? How does she respond to this news? All of these blessings that God has dropped into her life and all the really cool things that God gives me meaning, God gives me value, God shows up, God sees me. How does she react? How does she respond? Look at verse 25 one more time. What are her first words? Are her first words, woohoo, guess who's finally pregnant? All you haters out there, look at me. Is that what she does? Her very first thing, verse 25, thus the Lord has done for me. She gives God all the credit. All the credit. She doesn't try to talk trash to anybody. She doesn't kind of flaunt her blessings to anybody. She doesn't have to make a big deal about herself because she realizes this isn't about her. So here she is. She's been a recipient of this miracle. It's blowing her mind. She's like, wow, God has taught me so many lessons. How do I respond to this? Praise. Praise. Friends, that's always the answer. That's always the answer. When something good comes into your life, God shows up and gives you a miracle, answers a prayer, shows up in a time of need. That is the very best thing you can do immediately, is open your mouth to praise the person who made it happen. We are so quick to take the credit or share the credit with God. Oh, I was in the right place at the right time, but boy, it's a good thing I was ready for it, blah, 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 whatever. Oh, you know how long I've been waiting? It's been 70 years. I've been faithful, following the law, waiting for my moment, and sure enough, God decided to reward me. None of that. She doesn't have any time for that. All she has time for is praise. It's all God's credit. All the glory goes to him. So at the end of the day, yeah, I'm sort of impressed with Elizabeth, but you know who I'm really impressed with? I'm impressed with Elizabeth's God. Elizabeth's God seems like a big deal. He seems like he knows what he's doing. He seems like he's got a plan that's going to work out great, not just for Elizabeth, but for the whole world. And Elizabeth's a part of it. So she gives God the credit. But that's not the end of the story. Look at verse 39. This is so beautiful. In those days, this is after Mary gets her announcement. So Mary the Virgin, another level of difficulty, right? Mary the Virgin hears that she's going to have a baby, and this is a little weird because she's not married and there's no man in the picture. Well, he's in the picture, but he's off, and he's like off in the distance. And God's like, don't worry, I got this sorted out. It's going to be fine. Oh, and by the way, your cousin Elizabeth has had her own miraculous conception. Maybe you want to chill and talk to her. Somebody who can relate to this crazy news I just gave you. And verse 39, Mary takes God up on it and says, in those days, Mary arose and went with haste into the hill country to a town in Judah. And she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. And when Elizabeth heard the greeting of Mary, the baby leaped in her womb. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. And she exclaimed with a loud cry, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why is this granted to me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me? For behold, when the sound of your greeting came to my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her from the Lord. Jump down to verse 56. And Mary remained with her how long? 3 months, and then returned to her home. What does this tell me? Elizabeth chose to handle the blessings God gave her by choosing to invest in and support God's chosen mother for the Messiah. Did you notice that Elizabeth didn't become all about me, my pregnancy, my bump is bigger than yours, and I'm further along, and Elizabeth doesn't have any time for that. Mary comes to her and she is amazed at the miracle of God in giving her a child who's going to be the Son of God, who's going to be the Son of David, who's going to rule over Israel. She's like, what did I do to deserve the mother of the Lord coming to me? And we talked about this last week. She gives these beautiful words of affirmation. Do you think Mary, alone, unmarried, vulnerable, needed some encouragement at this point? And to come in, and she doesn't even say, hey, Elizabeth, and all of a sudden Elizabeth starts crying out, inspired by the Holy Spirit, you are blessed, you're blessed, you're blessed, you're blessed. You think that kind of perked her up a little bit? And then for 3 months, Elizabeth invested in Mary. Ladies, if you've had a baby, the first time, is it a little scary? How about that first trimester? How about that? I mean, all of them, all the trimesters, all the things. I get it. Who do you need in your life at that point? You need a calming influence in your life. You need somebody to say, hey, sweetheart, this happens to everybody. It's okay. You're going to be fine. Just hang in there with the sickness. It'll pass, right? You need that person. Who was that person for Mary? It was Elizabeth. Ironically, it wasn't even Mary's mother. Mary's mother, I'm sure, would have been willing to do it. But for God's purposes, he wanted Elizabeth to do it. And Elizabeth is not so caught up in her own miracle that she doesn't realize God gave me this blessing so I could help someone else. I love that. I think there's a lesson there for us, don't you think? Why does God comfort us, according to the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 1? He comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort other people who are going through troubles. This is the way God works. If you have something good, it's meant to be shared with somebody else. It's meant to be passed along. It's meant to be invited other people into what you have learned. That's our job. It's not just to look after me and mine and take care of my own little miracle, and aren't I great, I have my own little miracle. No. Every gift God gives you is intended to be passed along in some way to somebody else. So Elizabeth says, you know what I'm going to do with my miracle? I'm not going to just sit there and be like, ooh, I've got a miracle. She's going to invest in the mother of Jesus, and how much Mary must have needed that. Then I also want to show you something else really quick, and we're going to look at this more in depth in a couple of weeks, but look at verse 57. You're like, how many verses are there in this chapter? I know, it's crazy. There's a lot. Verse 57 of Luke 1 says this, now the time came for Elizabeth to give birth, and she bore a son. And her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown great mercy to her, and they what? Rejoiced with her. And on the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they would have called him Zechariah after his father. Now, hold on a second. Why would they think they have the right to call the baby anything? Because Zach is not talking, right? Zach's not saying, Zechariah, he's not saying, hey guys, I have this thing, I want to call him this. He's sitting over there, he can't talk yet. And so what do the people do? Oh, I guess we'll call him Zechariah Jr. That sounds like a great plan. And they were going to name him at this important circumcision ceremony. And notice who speaks up. I love this. Who speaks up? His mother answered, no. He shall be called John. Now, hold on a second. Why does she care what the baby's name is? This is really important. Because an angel already told Zechariah what the baby's name was. They didn't name their own kid. And the idea behind that is not just, oh, they got the naming rights and I don't have the name. No, what that means is this baby belongs to God. God names the child. John is God's baby. See, once you finally have that baby in your arms, don't you think she's tempted to take him back from God? Oh, God, thanks for this awesome miracle. I know I said I was going to give him back to you to be a servant and to be a messenger and to prepare the way for the Messiah. But you know what? Now that I got him, he's so cute. He smells so good sometimes. Squishy. Oh, the squishiness. That's my favorite. Little feet, squishy, little bellies, cheeks. Oh, my gosh. Saw Aiden, and I was just like, oh, I love that kid. He's so squishy. The squishiness is so amazing. Some of you have named your children Squish because of that. Not officially, it's a nickname, I think. It's not on his birth certificate, but whatever. God gave her this gift, right? And the understanding was, hey, Elizabeth, the time's going to come when you have to give him back. And if Elizabeth wanted to just ignore all that, oh, I won't call him John. Let's call him Zechariah Jr. And then he can be a nice priest in a nice respectable job like his father. You won't have to wear those weird clothes and eat the locusts and honey. He's not going to die at a young age because a king decides to behead him because he talks too much about God's expectations. No, I'll just keep him here. I'll keep my little miracle safe. How tempting do you think that was? Gotta be tempting. But Elizabeth, when the time comes for her to take back her child and name him whatever she wanted to name him, says, This is John. This is God's baby. He gave him to me so that I can give him to the world. Friends, Elizabeth does exactly what Mary did last week. She surrendered to God's plan. She said, you know what, I could maybe come up with a plan for this child that would be a lot safer than the plan God has for this child. But I guarantee you it's not better for him. It's not better. It's just safer. And friends, she was unwilling to do that. She surrendered to God's plans. And then the last thing, I think this is so beautiful. She fades into the background. You know, we never hear about Elizabeth ever again. Does she seem like an amazing lady that could use a book of her own, the book of Elizabeth? I'd read it. I'd preach through it. I'm making a commitment right now. Sermon series, the book of Elizabeth, if it had been there. But you know what? Elizabeth fades into the background. You know why? Because this isn't a story about Elizabeth. This is a story about Elizabeth's God who uses people like Elizabeth to make a difference in the world. So it makes sense the story's going to continue and not have much to do with Elizabeth. But here's the good news. Elizabeth's going to do her job in that story so that the story can continue and we can get to the stories about John and Jesus and the cross and the empty grave and the world needs to know. That's what Elizabeth's doing. My job is this piece of it. I'm going to do my piece, and then when the time comes, I'm going to fade into insignificance. You might even forget I existed, but you'll never forget Jesus existed, never. And her sacrifice enabled God's story to reach us across thousands of years of time, culture, language differences. It made it to us because Elizabeth stayed in her lane, and when the time came for the attention to be turned from Elizabeth to Jesus, or to John and then to Jesus, Elizabeth said, I'm willing to fade out. You know what? Her son was pretty remarkable, John. He had a similar role. He was a big deal in Israel, and everybody used to come and be baptized by him, and everybody wanted to know what John thought about everything. And then this Jesus guy shows up, and all of a sudden, nobody's coming to see John anymore. And John's disciples are a little perturbed, a little peeved, a little bitter. Oh, they're all going to that new guy, Jesus. Oh, well, who was here for them when I showed up and I was the first prophet in 400 years? Is that John's response? No, here's how John responds. You yourselves, he's talking to his own disciples, you bear me witness that I said I am not the Christ, I've been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Jesus' voice is what he's saying. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. And here we go, friends. If you can tattoo this on the inside of your eyelids, it would be a great idea. And certainly if this is your epitaph, if this is on your tombstone someday, this would be a great summary of your life and my life. He must increase, I must decrease. Where did John learn that? Maybe he learned it directly from the Holy Spirit. Or maybe, I don't know, he learned it from his mother, who set the example, who played her part, stayed in her lane, did her job. And then let the story be about somebody else. Let the story be about God breaking into a dark world, sending light and love and forgiveness and salvation. Maybe that story is more important than Elizabeth's story or John's story or your story or my story. And maybe Elizabeth figured that out. So she just fades. Okay. But don't forget Jesus. Friends, this lady, Elizabeth, she's pretty remarkable, huh? Her choices in the wake of a sudden miracle are awesome. They're remarkable. I pray for us, for you, for me, that we would embrace that same mindset. If you're waiting for your miracle, I beg you to stay faithful, to keep praying. Hold on to hope. When the miracle finally comes, I pray that you'll praise God and you'll help the people around you and you'll get involved in supporting others and surrendering to God's plans and be willing, give God I pray that you'll just react the same way, that we would be people like Elizabeth, because Elizabeth met her moment with dignity, with courage, with grace, and with faith. The question for us, how will we meet the moments that come to us? Because they are coming. You will have a moment when you have a chance to step up and play your part in God's plan. It's probably happening right now. How will you handle that moment? Let's pray. God, thank you for Elizabeth. Thank you for her story. Thank you that once she did her job, she was willing to fade into the background. All of us, God, have that same thing ahead of us. Right now, our story seems so big. It's like the only thing we can think about. How can I take care of myself and my family? How can I do this? How can I do that? But Lord, at the end of the day, help us to do what Elizabeth did and surrender ourselves to your plan, and then just allow you to determine what our story should be. And I pray, God, you'll help us to live this way for your honor and for your glory and not for our own credit. And I ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.